Hello. Thank you for visiting the Other Woman and Man Stories channel. Don't forget to subscribe. And here we go. 18-year-old Sarah was studying at the local college and dating her classmate Steve. He was 21, just 3 years older than Sarah. He came from a poor family, so from a young age he learned to value every dollar he earned. Steve worked evenings as a waiter to pay for his education and not have to ask his parents for extra money. This annoyed Sarah. She wanted to have fun and carefree times with her boyfriend, not sit in his cramped apartment. She dreamed of fancy restaurants, expensive clothes, and vacations. But Steve couldn't afford any of that. Sarah often threw tantrums about this, accusing him of stinginess and indifference towards her. But the young man just patiently explained that in the future, when he finishes his studies and finds a good job, he will definitely shower her with gifts. But Sarah didn't want to wait. She needed everything right away. 45-year-old Mark was a successful businessman, owner of a chain of car dealerships. He divorced his wife 10 years ago and had been single ever since. One day, Sarah went to get coffee at a trendy cafe near the college. There she happened to meet Mark, a wealthy and successful man. Mark walked into the same cafe to get coffee and immediately noticed the girl. They struck up a conversation. Mark was charmed by Sarah's beauty, youth, and liveliness. He offered to meet her that evening. Sarah agreed because Mark looked very respectable and could clearly give her everything she dreamed of. Soon they started a relationship. Sarah broke up with Steve right away. Why waste her time and beauty on a poor student? Mark courted Sarah generously. He gave her expensive gifts, took her to restaurants and shopping, and they spent weekends at his country villa with a pool and sauna. Sarah felt like she was in heaven from the luxury and comfort. She was already dreaming about always living this kind of life and intended to marry Mark as soon as possible. After 6 months, Mark proposed. The girl happily agreed. When Sarah announced her engagement to Mark, her mother nearly fainted from shock. She threw a huge tantrum at her daughter, calling her a fool. Sarah calmly listened to all the insults. On the wedding day, her mother never showed up, completely severing relations with her daughter. But Sarah was barely concerned because now she had a rich husband and a luxurious life ahead of her. The wedding was lavish. Mark pulled out all the stops, inviting many guests and ordering an expensive banquet. For their honeymoon, the newlyweds went to the Caribbean, where they spent 2 weeks in luxurious ocean view apartments. Sarah enjoyed the care and attention of her husband, as well as his generosity. Mark and Sarah had no children in their marriage. Mark did not insist on having a baby, understanding that Sarah was still too young and carefree for motherhood. She was only 19 herself and demanded attention and care like a child. Sarah was also in no hurry to get pregnant. She enjoyed the freedom and independence. Children were not at all in her plans. So 5 years passed. This year, the couple celebrated their 5-year anniversary. For the occasion, Mark gifted Sarah a new latest model smartphone and a beautiful gold ring with a diamond. And Sarah gave her husband herself as a present. Despite being married, Sarah was still a young, attractive woman. Many men ogled her and hit on her with compliments when she went out without her husband. By this point, Sarah was completely tired of the lifestyle of a pampered housewife. She craved those former romantic adventures and passion, and her aging husband no longer appealed to her like before. Plus, over the years, Mark had gotten fat and bald, which irritated his young wife. She felt that her husband looked frankly bad next to her. She constantly asked him to go on a diet and see a good surgeon, but Mark saw no need for it. One day, while sitting in a restaurant with her friends, Sarah complained about her husband Mark's appearance. "You should have stayed with Steve," one of her friends said. "You'd be with a wealthy young man now." "What does he have? What can he give me?" Sarah scoffed. Her friend looked at her in surprise. "Don't you know anything about your ex?" Sarah's eyes widened in astonishment too. What doesn't she know about Steve? And the woman told her that Steve now runs a large company, drives an expensive car, and is still not married. Sarah's eyes lit up. She decided to persuade her ex to meet with her at all costs. It took a lot of effort for Sarah to get Steve to agree. At first, he flat out refused, but over time, nostalgia for their relationship prevailed. And so, after some time, Steve agreed to see Sarah. The sly girl had already devised a plan for how she could get money from both men. And later, maybe she would choose one of them, because deceiving both would be difficult for long. When after so many years Sarah saw Steve, she was surprised by the changes. Before her stood a young, successful man, full of energy and health. Sarah smiled flirtatiously, feeling a thrill. All evening she flirted with Steve, trying to seduce him. But Steve was resilient and did not succumb immediately. Sarah had to make considerable effort and go on several dates before achieving intimacy with him. She once again noted the difference between young Steve and her aging husband Mark. If she really has to choose, she will definitely prefer Steve. They started meeting more often. Sometimes Sarah would stay with her lover for several days. She told Mark she was staying with a girlfriend. Mark suspected something fishy was going on, but didn't really worry about it. His love for his young wife had faded over time. Plus, the lucrative prenuptial agreement that Sarah signed without reading protected his assets in case of divorce. Sarah's presence still flattered Mark, added importance in the eyes of friends and partners, and the nights with the young wife were still quite enjoyable. So he was in no hurry to break it off and decided to wait. After 6 months, Sarah began to tire of the double life. Moreover, Steve demanded that she leave her husband. At first gently, then he started insisting, and then one day threatened to tell Mark everything if she didn't agree. That day, Sarah got very angry with her lover. They had a fight, and she decided not to see him anymore. But 3 weeks later, Sarah called Steve again, missing him. One day, after another 3-day separation from Mark, Sarah returned home. Her husband was lying on the couch watching TV. Next to him lay a thick envelope. "Hi," Sarah smiled. "What do you have there?" A surprise. Mark grinned at her. Sarah thought it was a gift for her and opened the envelope. Inside were photos capturing their secret meetings with Steve. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "A photographer friend sent them," Mark replied. He watched his wife with interest, waiting for her reaction. It seemed Sarah should start crying, begging for forgiveness and pleading not to kick her out on the street. But it didn't happen. Sarah simply told her husband that she had fallen out of love with him and that divorce and division of property awaited them next. She had decided for herself long ago that she wanted to stay with Steve, especially since she was sure that after the divorce from Mark, she would get half of his property. Mark laughed loudly. "Do you need help packing your bags? Take whatever you want. I even allow you to take the jewelry," he smirked. "What do you mean, allow?" Sarah was dumbfounded. Mark reminded her of the prenuptial agreement she signed and that Sarah would get nothing in the divorce. In shock, Sarah stood silently with her mouth open for a long time, like a fish thrown ashore. She clearly did not expect this turn of events. She wrote to Steve that her husband kicked her out. He promised to come and pick up his mistress. Sarah waited for him for several hours, but Steve never showed up. A little later he called and laughed out loud, calling her a stupid, greedy fool. Turned out, Steve never intended to live with her. If she had immediately given in to his persuasion to move in, he would have just slammed the door in her face. "Someone like you doesn't deserve good treatment," he said in parting and hung up. Now Sarah realized that she had lost everything. She cried bitterly. She had nowhere to go. She never reconciled with her mother and had no home of her own. She had to move in with friends. Sarah never worked and knew nothing, so she hurriedly looked for a new sponsor to replace Mark. But no one was going to treat her as generously as her ex-husband. Mostly the men she met were looking for a mistress and had no intention of providing for her the way her former husband did. Sitting alone in a rented apartment, Sarah pined for her former luxurious life and scolded herself for being such a fool. So Sarah lost everything because of her greed and frivolity. That's the story. Share your thoughts in the comments about this situation. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and be sure to like this video. It will greatly help promote the channel. Take care and have a wonderful day.